Do you ever lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering why nothing you do makes the emptiness go away? Picture this. You've checked all the boxes. Good job, decent relationships, maybe even some achievements. Yet there's this persistent ache in your chest, like a weight you can't name, can't explain, can't escape. You've tried everything, haven't you? Meditation apps that promise instant peace, self-help books that gather dust, therapy sessions where you talk in circles. You've even convinced yourself that this is just how life is, that everyone carries this secret burden of inexplicable sadness. But what if everything you've been taught about suffering is wrong? What if the very thing you're running from, this persistent pain, this nagging emptiness, isn't your enemy at all? What if it's actually your wisest teacher, desperately trying to guide you home to yourself? Here's the brutal truth. You're not suffering because life is cruel. You're suffering because you've become a stranger to yourself. You've spent so long performing, pleasing, and pretending that you've lost touch with who you actually are underneath all the masks. Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary minds in psychology, discovered something that will fundamentally change how you understand your pain. What you do not bring to consciousness returns as fate. Every pattern that keeps repeating in your life, every relationship that follows the same script, every self-sabotage that appears just when things start going well, these aren't random events. They're messages from the parts of ourselves we've refused to acknowledge. Your depression isn't a chemical imbalance to be medicated away. Your anxiety isn't a disorder to be eliminated. These aren't symptoms of weakness. They're alarm bells from your authentic self, screaming that you've wandered too far from who you really are. Today, we're going to turn toward your pain instead of away from it. We're going to listen to what it's been trying to tell you. And by the end, you'll understand not just why you've been suffering, but how that very suffering can become the key to your liberation. This isn't going to be comfortable. What we're about to explore will challenge everything you think you know about yourself. Some of you will want to click away when it gets too real. That's exactly when you need to stay. Are you ready to discover why you really suffer? Let's begin this descent into truth together. Right now, you probably believe your suffering comes from external sources. Your demanding boss, difficult relationships, the lack of money, social media comparisons, the crushing weight of others' expectations. These things are real and cause stress. But Carl Jung discovered something profound. External circumstances trigger suffering, but they don't create it. The real source lies much closer to home. You're suffering because you've become disconnected from your authentic self. Think back to when you were a child. Do you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be? You were probably wild, unfiltered. You cried when sad, raged when angry, loved fiercely without reservation. You had impossible dreams, impractical interests, embarrassing opinions. And slowly, systematically, the world began to tame you. Don't be so sensitive. Stop being dramatic. Be more responsible. Think about what others will say. Good girls don't get angry. Real men don't cry. You're being too much. With each correction, each disapproving look, you learned to hide. You developed what Jung called a persona, a mask you wear to be acceptable to others. At first, the mask felt temporary. But here's the insidious thing about masks. Wear them long enough, and you forget what your real face looks like. You became so good at reading rooms, at anticipating what others wanted, at molding yourself to fit expectations, that you lost touch with what you actually wanted. Your desires became what you thought you should desire. Your opinions became what would be well received. Your personality became a carefully curated performance. Jung called this the greatest tragedy of the soul, to live a life that is not yours. You're living someone else's life, a composite of parental expectations, societal pressures, and cultural programming. You've become a character in a story written by everyone except you. No wonder you're exhausted. No wonder you feel empty. You're trying to nourish a false self while your true self slowly starves in the shadows. This disconnection manifests in ways you might not recognize. You feel like you're watching your life from outside. You make decisions based on what you should do rather than what you want. You say yes when you mean no, smile when you want to scream. You have relationships with people who love your mask but have never met the real you, and deep down, you know it. You know that if they saw your true thoughts, your real struggles, they might not stick around. The saddest part? You've become so skilled at this performance that you've convinced yourself it is you. You've buried your authentic self so deeply that you've forgotten they exist. But your authentic self never dies. They just go underground. And from that underground place, they begin to send up signals, desperate attempts to get your attention, to call you back home. These signals are what we call suffering. Your depression is your authentic self's grief over the life you're not living. Your anxiety is their fear that you'll never find your way back. Your anger is their rage at being silenced. Your suffering isn't a malfunction. It's a guidance system. It's your soul's GPS, constantly recalculating the route back to your authentic self. There's a part of you that you hope no one ever discovers. A collection of thoughts, feelings, and desires that you've spent your entire life trying to hide. Not just from others, but from yourself. Carl Jung called this your shadow, and understanding it is the key to understanding why you suffer. Your shadow contains everything you've rejected about yourself. Every emotion you were told was inappropriate. Every desire you were taught was selfish. Every aspect of your personality that didn't fit the image you were supposed to project. Maybe you pride yourself on being nice, always helpful, never confrontational. But buried in your shadow is the part that's absolutely furious. Furious at being taken advantage of, at people who get away with selfishness while you sacrifice yourself. Or perhaps you see yourself as rational and controlled. But your shadow contains the part that's chaotic, emotional, impulsive. The part that wants to throw caution to the wind and feel everything deeply. Maybe you've built an identity around being independent and strong, but your shadow holds the part that's desperately tired of carrying everything alone. The part that wants to be vulnerable, to admit you don't have it all figured out. These shadow aspects aren't inherently evil. They're often our most human parts, the emotions that make us fully alive. But because we've been taught to see them as unacceptable, we've banished them to the unconscious. But what you banish doesn't disappear. It goes underground and begins to rule your life from the shadows. Think about the last time you had an inexplicably strong reaction to someone. Jung would say you were encountering your own shadow, projected onto another person. We tend to hate in others what we've refused to accept in ourselves. The shadow doesn't just influence who we dislike. It sabotages our lives. It's the shadow that makes you procrastinate on important projects. It's the shadow that makes you choose emotionally unavailable partners. It's the shadow that makes you sabotage success just when it's within reach. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people spend their lives being puppeted by their shadow while believing they're making conscious choices. They repeat the same patterns and wonder why they can't change. But here's the revolutionary part. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's a rejected part of yourself that just wants to come home. Every quality you've banished contains not just potential problems, but potential gifts. The anger you've suppressed might contain the fierce boundaries you need. The selfishness you've rejected might contain the healthy self-care you're missing. The chaos you've controlled might contain the creativity you've been stifling. The goal isn't to eliminate your shadow, it's to integrate it. To bring these rejected parts back into conscious awareness where you can work with them instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. This process isn't comfortable. You'll have to admit things your ego would prefer to deny. You'll have to see not just the saint you want to be, but the full human being you actually are. But when you stop running from your shadow and start embracing it, you become whole. You stop wasting energy maintaining impossible standards. You stop being sabotaged by unconscious forces. Most importantly, you reclaim the power that's been locked away in your shadow. Here's the most radical thing Jung discovered. Suffering isn't a mistake. It's not a punishment. It's not something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Suffering is sacred. It's a messenger from your soul, carrying information you desperately need to hear. Our culture treats suffering like a malfunctioning alarm, something irritating to be silenced. But Jung understood. The alarm isn't malfunctioning. Your house is actually on fire. Every form of psychological suffering carries a specific message about what's wrong with how you're living. Until you listen to that message, the suffering will continue. Depression often carries the message: the life you're living is not your life. It's your authentic self's grief over abandoned dreams, stifled creativity, settled relationships, paths chosen based on others' expectations. Anxiety frequently says, you're trying to control what's uncontrollable while ignoring what you can influence. It's your psyche's response to living misaligned with your values. Chronic anger might be telling you your boundaries have been violated repeatedly. It's accumulated rage from all the times you said yes when you meant no, smiled when you wanted to scream. Emptiness often signals you've disconnected from your emotions and desires so completely that you can no longer feel what you want. Relationship patterns that repeat are usually messages about unhealed wounds that are still running your present. Your unconscious keeps creating similar situations, hoping you'll finally learn what needs to be learned. When you understand suffering as a message, it transforms your relationship with pain entirely. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim, you begin to see yourself as someone receiving guidance from the wisest part of yourself. Think about people you most admire: artists, teachers, leaders who've made deep impact. Almost all have one thing in common. They've transformed their suffering into wisdom. They've allowed pain to crack them open instead of harden them shut. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." He understood what Jung discovered. Our greatest suffering often becomes our greatest strength, deepest compassion, most profound wisdom. But this transformation requires what Jung called holding the tension. Instead of rushing to fix or escape suffering, you learn to sit with it, to feel it fully, to listen to what it's teaching you. When you start treating suffering as a teacher instead of an enemy, everything changes. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" You begin to understand that your darkest moments often precede your greatest breakthroughs, that difficult relationships teach your most important lessons, that your deepest wounds, when properly tended, become sources of healing, not just for yourself, but for others. This is Jung's wounded healer archetype, the person who has descended into darkness and emerged with light to share, who has faced their demons and can now help others face theirs. But becoming a wounded healer requires courage to feel everything instead of numbing everything. You have to trust that your suffering has something to teach you that you can't learn any other way. There comes a moment when something shifts fundamentally. It's when you stop fighting against yourself and start fighting for yourself. This is Jung's individuation, becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. It's not about perfection. It's about wholeness, integrating all the scattered, hidden parts of yourself. When you reach this stage, you stop needing others' approval to feel worthy. You stop changing opinions based on who's in the room. You stop sacrificing your needs to keep others comfortable. Not because you've become selfish, but because you understand that betraying yourself helps no one. You begin making decisions from your center instead of your fears. You choose relationships that nourish your authentic self. You pursue work that aligns with your values. This doesn't make life easy. Living authentically can be more challenging because you can no longer hide behind excuses. You become responsible for your happiness, growth, and meaning. But here's what makes it worth it. You finally feel alive. For perhaps the first time since childhood, you experience what it's like to be fully yourself in the world. People notice the change. Some are drawn to your authenticity. They feel safer to be themselves around someone comfortable being themselves. But others are threatened. They may try to pull you back into old patterns or distance themselves. This is challenging. As you become authentic, you outgrow relationships built on your false self. It's painful, but necessary. You can't maintain intimate connections with people who can only love your mask. But the relationships that survive become deeper and more meaningful. When people love your authentic self, flaws and all, that love feels fundamentally different. It's not conditional on performance. It's love for who you actually are. You also understand that your journey through suffering wasn't meaningless. Every difficult experience served a purpose, breaking down false structures to make room for something real. Your depression taught you the cost of living inauthentically. Your anxiety showed you where you were trying to control the uncontrollable. Your anger revealed violated boundaries. Your emptiness demonstrated disconnection from true desires. Now these emotions serve as early warning systems, alerting you when you drift from your authentic path. This is psychological maturity, not the absence of difficult emotions, but the ability to work with them skillfully. You develop what Jung called a religious attitude toward your own psyche, deep respect for your inner wisdom. You discover your unique purpose, not what others assigned or what you thought you should have, but what emerges naturally from who you actually are. You are no longer the same person who started this journey. The person who began this video was largely unconscious, driven by patterns they didn't understand, repeating cycles they couldn't break. That person lived in reaction to life, seeking validation from outside sources. But you've awakened to something profound. You are not a victim of your psychology. You are a collaborator with it. This transformation brings freedom and responsibility. You're no longer trapped by unconscious patterns, but you're also accountable for your healing. Once you recognize your authentic self, you must live authentically. You can no longer blame others without examining your contribution. You can no longer stay in situations requiring self-betrayal. You can no longer make fear-based decisions without acknowledging the cost. But here's the paradox. The more responsibility you take for your inner world, the more freedom you experience in your outer world. You begin living what Jung called a symbolic life, where every experience has meaning, every relationship teaches something, every challenge offers growth. You stop seeing events as random and start recognizing deeper patterns. Most importantly, you understand that your healing was never just about you. When you transform suffering into wisdom, you become a light for others lost in darkness. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. You become what the world needs, a conscious human being. Someone awake to their patterns, responsible for their growth, dedicated to living in alignment with truth. The suffering that felt like a curse reveals itself as what cracked you open to let light in. The pain you avoided becomes the doorway to the most meaningful life you could imagine. This is your new beginning. Not the end of difficulty, but conscious relationship with difficulty. Not elimination of suffering, but transformation of suffering into wisdom. You are no longer a victim of your psychology. You are its conscious collaborator. What will you do with this freedom? If you've made it this far, you have the courage to face truth. The question is, what will you do with what you now know? Your suffering has been trying to wake you up. Your shadow wants to come home. Your authentic self wants to break free. Will you let them? The choice is yours. but you can never again claim you didn't know. The light has been turned on. You've seen what's possible. Now go live it.